Hello, my name is Michael Scott, and I'm going to be going over the licensure requirements for the state of Virginia, the state in which I live in. Now, before an individual can get licensed, they need to meet certain academic requirements, which would be fulfilled by the master's degree program. According to the Virginia Department of Health Professionals, this must include a course that is 60 graduate hours or 90 quarter graduate hours, and within that coursework, the must meet 13 areas that are classes that consist of at least 3 semester hours or one graduate course, or 4 quarter hours, which is again a graduate course in a quarter-hour graduate program. These 13 sections include professional counseling, identity, function, and ethics, theories of counseling and psychotherapy, counseling and psychotherapy techniques, human growth and development, group counseling and psychotherapy theories and techniques, career counseling and developmental theories and techniques, appraisal, evaluation, and diagnostic procedures, abnormal behavior and psychopathology, multicultural counseling theories and techniques, research, diagnosis and treatment of addictive disorders, marriage and family systems theory, and then lastly, a supervised internship. For the state of Virginia, this internship needs to be at least 600 hours, and 240 of these hours need to be face-to-face, or in the Latin, vis-a-vis. Moving forward, after you achieve this academic requirement, then you move to your postmaster's supervisory or supervised clinical experience. Now, in the state of Virginia, first, the supervisor must be board certified as a supervisor counselor. And in order to do that, they need to meet certain requirements. Once you have attained your academic requirements, you can then apply for a resident in counseling temporary license for the state of Virginia. Now, this license needs to be renewed yearly. It has some fees associated with it. It has these academic requirements associated with it. And this is if you're not going the endorsed route, which is essentially for individuals that already have licensure in another state or from a foreign country. During this time, between 21 months and 4 years is the full length that you must achieve the requirements of a resident in counseling in order to become board certified. Now, in terms of your supervised clinical experience, these requirements are 3,400 supervised residency hours in total, 2,000 of which must be vis-a-vis. Now, in your internship at the school, let's say you are not in the state of Virginia and you are in a more rigorous internship as part of your degree program, past these 600 hours, an additional 300 hours may go towards these 2,000 hours. So even though you need 3,400 hours in total, let's say you had done 900 hours in your graduate school internship, you would actually only need 1,700 hours of face-to-face supervised clinical experience. 200 hours of this 3,400 must also be directly with the supervisor. They must be at least an hour, and they cannot be no longer than 4 hours. This is to ensure that supervised counselors are not using their license eligible, which is not necessarily a Virginia state term, but a common term within hiring practices, or counseling residents or resident in counseling students, if you will, and that they are actually teaching and training these individuals. Furthermore, when we will get into this later, some of this training needs to be in diagnostics. As far as the exam, once one is passed, has surpassed these 3,400 supervisory hours, these 2,000 face-to-face hours, give or take some additional time in graduate school, and these 200 hours of supervisory sessions, you're then eligible to take the NCMHCE, the National Clinical Mental Health Counselor's Examination. Once passing this and meeting and fulfilling those requirements, you will be granted your LPC, your Licensed Professional Counselor title, which is the title for Virginia for a counselor, professional counselor, mental clinical health counselor. There is no tiered system in the state of Virginia. However, there is tiered systems for substance abuse counselors, and there are tiered systems for QMHPs, which are bachelor's degree individuals that have some experience and usually volunteer work within the same helping profession. As far as the scope of practice for an LPC within the state of Virginia, there is not a clearly defined scope of practice. Instead, there are some laws and some regulations that say what are reasons that your license can be revoked, and then there are some definitions within the Virginia law. So in terms of what a reason that your license can be revoked, or you can be put on some form of disciplinary action or probation, these include things such as a felony conviction, committing some sort of fraud, which usually entails lying about your hours in order to get your license. Drug or alcohol addiction, while isn't necessarily a means to revoke your license, if it is being shown to impact your clinical experience with your clients, this is also a reason to revoke or put you on probation. Any intentional or negligent harm to your patients. Practicing outside of competency. This is an interesting one. There seems to be some case law associated with this, but essentially what that means is if you are not deeply trained in what it is that you are doing, some form of therapy, for example, you've never done any mindfulness therapy, you've never trained in it, no one showed you how to do it, and then you just simply take upon yourself from reading some research to conduct mindfulness treating, and you end up causing some form of harm. This could be shown to be intentional or negligent harm, but this can also be shown as practicing outside of your competency. A lack of continuing education, because in the state of Virginia, you need at least 20 continuing education credits, but you do not need to do that the first year after gaining your license. So the first year after gaining your license, you kind of get out of jail free card to set up your practice and start doing things, but after that time, you need to move forward in continuing education credits, or some credits within postgraduate or postdoc school as well goes towards those continuing educators. And then lastly, a kind of vaguely defined term, any act likely to harm the public. All of these rules are set over by the VAC 115-20-140 regulations, which are set by the Virginia Department of Health Professionals. Now, when it comes to the law, in terms of defining what it is that counseling does in terms of scope of practice, Virginia Code 54.1-3500 defines counseling in Section 1 as, quote, conducting assessments and diagnoses for the purpose of establishing treatment and treatment goals and objectives. And in Section 2 defines counseling as planning, implementing, and evaluating treatment plans using treatment interventions to facilitate human development and to identify and remediate mental, emotional, or behavioral disorders and associated distresses that interfere with mental health. Now, Section 1 is interesting because this is where the law states that counseling has the right to do diagnostics. And it is later kind of shown in regulations and policy that counseling diagnosis is a part of the supervised clinical experience and those 200 hours where they need to be teaching you at least some of the basic principles of diagnostics. In the second section, this seems to be more of your standard counseling experience throughout all of the states, because roughly half of the states allow individuals to diagnose, and Virginia being one of the first states to, I believe it actually, the first state, to license counselors, their scope of practice seems to be a little bit more broadly defined and a little bit larger. And that one surprising element was how undefined some of those things were for me. I was really surprised to find that there wasn't a clear definition of what types of therapies counselors can do, what disorders can be done. It's kind of very open-ended, and that really allows the regulation of the ACA and different departments to kind of write those policies, but then also be able to be fluid in changing those policies without literally taking an act of Congress or an act of the State House of Representatives and the State Senate and signed by the governor in order to kind of change what those scopes are. And so, especially with federal implementation occurring recently with the Veterans Affairs and TRICARE, I found it really interesting that it was so fluid. I would have expected it to be hammered down a lot more. Thank you for your time, and let me know if you have any questions below.